I'm Isa Suarez in London, and this is CNN.
Live from CNN Abu Dhabi, this is Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
This hour, what may be the most damning testimony yet in the United States hearings on the January the 6th Capitol riot.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now."
What these new revelations could mean for the former US president in just a few moments. First up, though, this hour, while it bombs and battles Ukraine, Russia today is getting a lesson in the law of unintended consequences. Russian President Vladimir Putin probably did not think this would lead to this.
Today, NATO leaders took the historic decision to invite Finland and Sweden to become members of NATO. The agreement concluded last night by Turkey, Finland and Sweden paved the way for this decision.
NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg there, he indicated NATO would fast-track Sweden and Finland's membership bids after Turkey dropped its objections. And this means NATO will get even bigger right across the border from Russia. Putin, of course, used NATO expansion to justify the invasion of Ukraine. Russia today calling the news destabilizing. NATO is also bolstering its defenses in Eastern Europe, and President Joe Biden says the US will step up. This includes establishing a permanent army headquarters in Poland, adding troops in Romania, and sending more fighter jet squadrons to the United Kingdom. Stoltenberg says Ukraine's allies are prepared, quote, for the long haul. Here's what Kyiv is up against. This is the moment a Russian missile slammed into a crowded shopping mall on Monday. 18 people were killed. More remains have been found, so that number could go higher. CNN's Salma Abdelaziz is at the scene, and she spoke to our Max Foster earlier about the search.
These firefighters are working around the clock to try to find the bodies of the missing. There's over 20 people unaccounted for. They've been working around the clock here. Again, hundreds of people. It's a massive operation. Police, military, firefighters, cleanup crews to try to find those who are unaccounted for. We can only assume, and officials tell us, of course, it is assumed they are dead. They are just trying to find the bodies for their loved ones. Now, Russia claims that they were hitting a weapons depot, but you can see right in front of you here, Max, this is a shopping mall. It's hard to even imagine that it once was so devastated it is, but it is clearly a shopping mall. And President Zelensky has been clear. He doesn't think this was an accident by Russia. He says that Russia intentionally targeted this civilian area, that Russia intentionally is hitting civilians, killing innocents. He called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting the other day. He wants Russia to be seen as a state sponsor of terrorism. He calls what you see behind me here an act of terror, but it's a continuation of something we've seen over the last few days, Max, and that is, as President Biden has met with world leaders, as these two major summits have taken place, as these powerful nations have discussed what to do about Russia, what to do about the war in Ukraine, President Putin has been sending this message. He can hit this country anywhere, anytime.
That's Salma Abdelaziz on the ground. From devastation then to diplomacy and the reshaping of Europe. CNN's Clarissa Ward has been observing all of this. She is currently in Madrid for that NATO meeting. And what do you make of what we have learnt over the past, 24 hours, Clarissa?
Well, I think the expectation was that we were going to see a dramatic bolstering of forces and military installations and support for the NATO alliance. But it is pretty extraordinary, Becky, to think back to 2019 when President Macron said that he believed, NATO was experiencing a kind of brain death, if you will. And look at it now. There have been times where NATO has really struggled to find its relevance in the moment. This is not not one of them. With this new strategic concept, they have made it very clear that Russia is seen as the greatest threat to the alliance, while also underscoring that NATO doesn't seek any confrontation or hostilities or pose any threat to Russia. And I think you hit on a really important point before, Becky, when you talked about what a miscalculation this has been for Russian President Vladimir Putin, who, as Biden said, wanted the Finlandization of Europe and has ended up with the NATOization of Europe. So really a massive display of support for Ukraine here in Madrid, leaders coming together. But interestingly, in an impassioned speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky, it's clear that while Ukraine is tremendously grateful for the support, they still would very much like to be seen as, you know, having a possibility of entering into the alliance. Take a look at what he had to say.
NATO's open door policy shouldn't remind us of the mechanism of the old Kyiv metro barriers. They are open, but as soon as you approach them, they are shut until you pay. Has Ukraine not paid enough? Is our contribution to the defence of Europe and the entire civilization not enough?
Now, despite that impassioned plea there, Becky, it's unlikely that Ukraine will be joining NATO anytime soon. And I do think it's important to underscore for our viewers that for President Vladimir Putin, despite being unsettled by today's developments, even though they had been expected, particularly with Finland and Sweden joining NATO, I think Russia is ready and willing and able, most importantly, to play the long game here. And they are counting on the fact that President Biden and President Macron and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who are all facing challenges politically at home, will not be able to withstand this amount of pressure, even as Russia continues to weaponize food and energy, resulting in soaring inflation, that they will be forced at a certain point to capitulate on some level in terms of sustaining this level of support. That, of course, is a gamble, because we've heard it affirmed many times today from various leaders, including the head, the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, who said, you know, we are in this for the long haul. But Russia believes that liberal democracies, precisely because they answer to voters and not just to the sort of stances and positions of their various leaders, that Russia has an advantage in that sense, because Putin can keep this grinding on for as long as he sees fit.
Clarissa Ward is in Madrid. Appreciate it, Clarissa. Thank you. Well, Turkey's stance on Finland and Sweden caused headaches for NATO, but Russia's war in Ukraine show it's a headache the alliance will have to tolerate. Our lead story in today's edition of the Meanwhile in the Middle East newsletter explores Turkey's role in NATO. You can sign up to have that story delivered to your inbox at CNN.com. The newsletter, a terrific read. Do sign up. Well, the question as to whether Donald Trump knew the mob assembled in his name on January the 6th might turn violent was answered in stunning clarity on Tuesday. A former aide in the Trump White House testified to Congress that Trump and his inner circle knew the crowd was armed and ready for action. Cassidy Hutchinson, seen here, revealed stunning details of the events leading up to and during the attack on the Capitol. CNN's Pamela Brown has more from Washington.
As an American, I was disgusted.
Bombshell testimony from surprise witness Cassidy Hutchinson, a former top aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
That evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared and nervous for what could happen on January 6th.
Hutchinson telling the committee White House officials knew something big was brewing for January 6th, testifying that 4 days prior, Trump's former attorney Rudy Giuliani told her Trump himself planned to go to the Capitol on the 6th.
We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful.
And when she approached Meadows for more details, she says Meadows gave an ominous response.
He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. things might get real bad on January 6th.
After things did get real bad at the Capitol. According to Hutchinson, lead White House counsel Pat Cipollone pleaded with Meadows to get Trump to do something to stop it, saying,
Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your effing hands. This is getting out of control.
And even when the rioters began to chant, Meadows told Cipollone Trump believed Pence deserves it.
Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
Hutchinson said on January 7th, Meadows encouraged Trump to condemn the rioters to salvage his legacy.
There's already talks about invoking the 25th Amendment. You need this as cover.
And Hutchinson described seeing Trump express rage various times over stories regarding his 2020 election loss. One such time after his former attorney general told the Associated Press he had not seen widespread fraud that would change the election.
There was ketchup dripping down the wall, and there's a shattered porcelain plate on the floor. The valet had articulated that the president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall.
A former Trump loyalist, Hutchinson testified that watching the violence and destruction unfold on January 6th was devastating.
It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie. It's something that I still struggle to work through the emotions of that.
Another revelation coming out from Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony is that Mark Meadows, her former boss, and Trump's former attorney Rudy Giuliani sought presidential pardons relating to January 6th. Now, we do want to note the Secret Service released a statement in the wake of the allegations that the former president lunged at the wheel in the presidential motorcade because he wanted to go to the Capitol. Now, in response to that, the Secret Service says that it has been cooperating with the Select Committee since its inception in spring 2021 and will continue to do so, including by responding on the record to the committee regarding the new allegations surfaced in today's testimony. Pamela Brown, CNN, Capitol Hill.
And it's worth noting that a U.S. Secret Service official has told CNN that the agent named in that testimony disputes some aspects of Cassidy Hutchinson's story. And the Secret Service informed the committee agents are willing to testify on the record that Donald Trump did not try to grab the wheel of his limousine and drive to the Capitol to join the protesters. But Hutchinson's testimony is still rippling through the halls of power in Washington. CNN heard from some Republican lawmakers who were privately stunned at some of her accounts. Others said it doesn't really matter all that much because most people have already made up their minds to either love or hate Donald Trump, and no amount of congressional testimony will change anything. Let's talk more about all of this with CNN's legal analyst, Carrie Cordero. It's good to have you. We spoke at the beginning of these hearings. What are the criminal charges that could conceivably come off the back of this? Let's talk about why these hearings are happening at all and what the motivation is at this point.
Sure. So, Becky, as I think we discussed before, last time I was with you, the Congressional Committee has the goal of establishing a historical record. And so determining what the facts were leading up to January 6, 2021, and what transpired on that day. And then they also are supposed to be considering potential legislative changes to be able to better secure the Capitol, make sure nothing like this ever happens again in America. But there is this secondary part that is a common theme running throughout the hearings, which is the potential for criminal liability of the people who are being exposed throughout the hearings. And so the committee has the ability to, at the end of this process, refer to the Justice Department potential criminal conduct that it believes it obtained through its investigation. And then it would be up to the U.S. Justice Department whether or not to bring those charges. At the same time, the Justice Department is conducting its own investigation into January 6th, which includes low-level people who actually just engaged in the violence and the attack on the Capitol. It includes far-right violent extremist groups who are believed to have coordinated and led the attack on the Capitol. And then we also are starting to get some indications publicly, including through the execution of search warrants, that there are potentially a former high-ranking Justice Department official who is under investigation, and in some way the former president's lawyer, John Eastman, may also be involved in that criminal investigation. So the question is whether or not the planning and plotting of overturning a U.S. election and the violence that accompanied it will reach the highest levels of the former White House.
Fascinating. At the end of Tuesday's hearing, the committee revealed that it knows about efforts by some folks in the Trump world to influence or prevent witnesses from testifying. It is often said that the cover-up, of course, is worse than the crime. Do you think that there could be legal trouble here?
Well, there could be. So witness tampering and obstruction of Congress are both violations of federal law. And this would fall into the category of very discrete, specific people that the committee could refer to the Justice Department for criminal charges. So the committee has already done this. It has referred for contempt certain individuals who refuse to cooperate with the committee's request for information. And 2 of those prosecutions are moving forward. So if the committee thinks that they have the appropriate evidence of witness tampering, and the committee released yesterday in its hearing with Cassidy Hutchinson a couple examples of messages that were sent to at least one witness that appear to be intimidating in nature, the question remains whether there are more of those types of messages, and presumably whether or not the committee knows who they came from.
It's good to have you. This continues. We were, of course, and just to remind our viewers, expecting these congressional hearings to go slightly dark for the sort of holiday period. So this was quite a surprise when we got this testimony yesterday, and shocking as it was, much watched and being much reacted to on both sides of the divide. This isn't over. We're not sure when the next hearing will be. Kerry, we'll have you back. Thank you very much indeed. Just ahead. Winter in Europe is still months away, but Brussels is putting a fire under its efforts to make sure that there will be enough fuel. The EU's Energy Commissioner up next to explain. And later, my colleague Christiane Amanpour talks about her exclusive interview with Ukraine's First Lady and how she is coping with 5 months of war.
Inside Africa, in association with Zenith Bank.
At YIA, we are creating the next generation of African innovators and inventors to design solutions to problems that do exist in their local communities.
Former math and physics teacher Samson Wambuzi is a co-founder of YIA Air Science, an offline learning platform featuring STEM-focused curriculum. According to YIA's website, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, 75% of school-aged children in Uganda were out of school due to barriers such as financial constraints and distance.
This is what we actually mean. Places that don't have internet or where people don't even have access to smartphone devices. It really warms my heart to see that children who are living the life I used to live are able to get quality education using the technologies that they have at home.
Blueprint, in association with Qatar Airways.
When the COVID wrecking ball hit the industry and grounded all of the aircraft, we saw people in a state of panic about getting on an aircraft again.
Teague, a Seattle-based tech design company, created a device it says can reduce the spread of viruses on board airplanes.
People's attitudes towards public spaces have changed, so we found a way to make it even safer. It's a solution to social distancing. What AirShield delivers is virtual distancing because you're achieving exactly the same outcome but just by manipulating the airflow.
The device fits over the cabin's air supply and redirects exhaled particles from each passenger straight down through the plane's vents, creating what Teague calls an invisible curtain between neighbouring passengers.
We think this is potentially even the revolution in economy that everyone's been waiting for.
Blueprint, in association with Qatar Airways.
Well, more on our top story, what's being done at the NATO summit in Madrid to bolster Ukraine's fight in the face of what is now a 5-month onslaught from Russia, and how the defence bloc is expanding in the face of that Russian threat coming up. First up, though, let's get you up to speed on some of the other stories that are on our radar right now. And Philippine journalist and Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa is vowing to keep her online news site Rappler open. She said it will appeal what's effectively a shutdown order by the government. Rappler has been critical of outgoing President Rodrigo Duterte and his anti-drug campaign. Ghislaine Maxwell has been sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. She was convicted last year for helping Jeffrey Epstein groom and sexually abuse underage girls. On Tuesday, she spoke in court telling victims she was sorry for the pain she caused them and hoped that her conviction brings them closure. We're returning to that NATO summit now, and we've been showing you many of the world's most powerful people huddled in conversation, important talks to be sure. But as NATO bolsters its defence, the European bloc is struggling with an issue that's looming over Russia's war in Ukraine and European democracy: energy security. As NATO and the EU tighten the screws on Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader continues to squeeze energy supplies to much of the continent, even cutting off Poland and Bulgaria. Brussels is ambitious. It wants to replace 2/3 of Russian natural gas imports by the end of the year. And after Moscow slashed gas supplies through the key Nord Stream pipeline, EU countries announced action this week on natural gas storage. Tweeting, EU energy ministers adopted new rules which will improve the EU's security of supply in the context of the war in Ukraine. EU member states will ensure their gas storage facilities are filled before winter, share storage facilities in the spirit of solidarity. Kadri Simpson is the EU Energy Commissioner, and she joins us now live from Brussels. You've said that it is time to step it up in regard to preparing for what you've said will be a serious disruption of gas supply in the EU this winter. What exactly does that look like?
Well, we have to be prepared for any scenario. And right now we know that Russia is not a reliable energy supplier. It has cut off countries like Poland, Bulgaria, but also Finland entirely. And last week, Gazprom reduced the gas supply to companies in 5 more member states. So right now, overall, 12 member states are directly affected, and some member states no longer receive Russian gas at all. So there is, I have to tell you that there is no immediate risk to security of supply, but this is mostly thanks to the record LNG deliveries to Europe. So also in May, we received another record volumes. It was 12.8 billion cubic meters, and a significant share of it came from the United States. And indeed, our preparation foresees that we have to fill our underground gas storage. So right now it is close to 60%.
The EU imported 155 billion cubic meters of Russian gas last year, as I understand it. That amounts to about 40% of the bloc's total consumption. The bloc's proposed replacements by the end of this year, which include LNG diversification and renewables, amongst other things, amount to around 102 billion cubic meters. That is according to data from the EU Commission. That is a big deficit to fill. Do you expect to see rationing by countries as they hit the winter months and they don't have enough energy for consumers? Is that realistic at this point?
Well, we have been preparing for this winter and heating season and a possible serious disruptions since the beginning of this year already. But seeing the recent developments, so we must step it up, and there are several things we must do. So first, we must use less energy. Yes, it is impossible to fully replace the 155 billion cubic meters of gas that we received from Russia each year. And we must continue to fill our gas storage. This gives us buffer. But second, we must replace gas with other sources of energy if it's possible. So we are accelerating renewables deployment. And third, of course, there are other gas producers. So we have set up the EU energy platform to pool our demand. We are negotiating with our partners and we are ready to launch joint purchases.
Right, and that is something that a number of European countries whose leaders I have spoken to suggest is the only way forward, that there is this sort of energy union that the bloc can take advantage of, because otherwise, quite frankly, people will suffer. Let's just be quite clear here. I asked you a specific question. Should consumers in Europe expect energy to be rationed? You say we have to use less. As we approach these winter months, we are already hearing that countries may have to ask consumers to button down, otherwise there'll be rationing. Do you expect to see rationing?
Well, we are working very hard to ensure that we would not need curtailment, and this means that reducing demand proactively, doing as much fuel switching as possible, and ensuring maximum renewable production capacity. And in any case, even the worst case scenario, even if there will be full disruption of Russian gas flows, we have rules in place to protect our households and for the member states to help each other. So solidarity rules say, for example, that if one country is having difficulties with providing gas to households, then neighboring countries will step in. This solidarity is a key to overcome this difficult winter.
At the G7 summit leaders, earlier the week, leaders agreed to explore a price cap on Russian oil and gas. Is there unity for this across the bloc? And what are the hurdles that it would present? Because, quite frankly, this can be seen as a tacit acknowledgement of the fact that at present, these sanctions on Russia aren't working.
Well, there are already 6 sets of sanctions from EU side, and they demanded unanimity. But together with our international partners, we are exploring the options for price caps, both for oil and gas. And indeed, G7 leaders discussed this and agreed yesterday that these options need to be looked into urgently. And as they stressed, our aim is to reduce the Russian revenues from oil and gas and to make sure that Kremlin isn't not profiting from their war of aggression. So we are working on these.
Should an agreement be reached on this, for it to be effective, of course, in slashing Russia's revenues, China and India are going to need to play ball. They are buying heavily discounted oil and gas from Russia at present, keeping Russia's revenues high, allowing them the ability to continue their war in Ukraine. Do you have any indication that China and India will be willing to do so, to play ball, were these price caps to come into existence?
Well, if they are buying with significant discounts, then revenues are not so high as it would have been if Russia has free access to world markets. But of course, those caps, they require close global coordination, and these measures are not easy to design in a way that there will be no side effects. But we do have different forums where we can also speak with India and China, and we will do so.
The EU chief on climate policy tweeting today that shift away from fossil fuels is even more urgent after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But we know, frankly, this energy shortage is now forcing, and we've been discussing this, the EU to dig back into fossil fuels, gas being, of course, one of those. It's a bridging fuel between sort of oil and gas dependence and diversified renewable fuels, but it's just a bridge. How far is what is going on at present, to your mind, setting back the green energy aspirations and policies of the EU and the climate agenda as a whole?
Well, indeed, we made our decision very quickly, already in the beginning of March, that we will end our dependence on Russian energy. And we were the biggest importers of not only natural gas, but also oil. And as you know, we already have sanctioned the coal from Russia, covering 100% of coal imports and 90% of oil imports. And when it comes to gas, well, this is not happening overnight because oil and coal markets, they are global, but gas, there is infrastructure constraints. But we have to replace it with green alternatives, both biomethane, we will accelerate our hydrogen projects, but also where we can, and in power generation we will replace it with renewables. But this winter might also need extraordinary measures. And so some of our member states have indicated that they will keep coal-fired power plants running. But that doesn't mean that they are not respecting our commitment to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by the end of this decade.
It's good to have you. We'll have you back. You have an extremely important file on energy in the EU. It'll be good to for our viewers to get a perspective for you as we move towards those winter months. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. 5 months of suffering with no end in sight. Ukraine's First Lady talks about the steep price her nation and her family are paying for Vladimir Putin's war. That is up next.
Wherever you go in the world, one airline goes further to make it feel exceptional. Qatar Airways, going places together.
I'm Delia Gallagher in Rome, and this is CNN.
We need to hold on. As you said, it's very difficult to hold on for 5 months.
Well, that was Ukraine's First Lady speaking to CNN as Russia's war on her country grinds on. The United Nations now says Vladimir Putin's invasion has left more than 10,000 civilian casualties, nearly half of them fatalities. But Putin's aims in Ukraine took a hit today as NATO formally invited Sweden and Finland to join and expand the alliance. Ukraine's president wants his country invited next. Volodymyr Zelensky addressing NATO leaders at today's summit in Madrid, rhetorically asking if his country hasn't already paid enough to join. Well, CNN's Christiane Amanpour spoke with Ukraine's First Lady about that price for her country and her family. Christiane joins us now with more on what was, Christiane, an international TV exclusive. Olena Zelenska telling you people now realise this suffering could last a very long time. What more did she tell you?
Well, that's right, Becky, and I thought she put it really well, because when I pointed out how the world had really galvanized and mobilized towards Ukraine and seeing its initial, heroic resistance, she said, look, we now understand that this, what we thought might be just a sprint, is in fact becoming a marathon. So yes, they had hoped that this would be over by now, but I think they are seeing the reality, seeing what Russia's doing in the East, and talking now about the long haul. That, in addition to what she said, was a very difficult time, not just for herself and her husband and her children, obviously, but for the whole country and all the people. And this is what she talked about, relationships and just mental health and all the daily travails that the people have to go through.
Fortunately, those 2 months when I didn't see my husband at all, that's in the past. I can see him sometimes for a short time, and not very often, but I can physically feel him next to me. This isn't normal. It's not a normal relationship when children cannot see their father and have to talk to him on the phone. So our relationship is on pause, just as it is for many, well, all Ukrainians.
And she talked about, again, the continuing resistance, what Ukraine is motivated to do to save its own country. And she called what Russia did barely 24 hours before our interview, i.e. striking that mall in central Ukraine. She said what her husband did, that this was an act of terrorism, an act of state terrorism. Now, interestingly, you've seen that a video has been released which slows down the moment of impact from an object onto that mall. It is a missile. There was, according to those who were around, absolutely no military infrastructure around it. We know that nearly 20 people were killed, dozens more were injured, and this is how this war has been going, mostly fought against civilians. That is an absolute fact.
Well, Ukraine front and centre, of course, at that NATO summit that is underway now, Christian, in Madrid, and a momentous day for the NATO alliance. This is being called the most consequential moment in this defence bloc's history in decades. You've been speaking to the Spanish Prime Minister, the host of this meeting. What's he been telling you?
Well, precisely because of what you just heard from Olena Zelenska, what I just said about civilians and Russia's aims, he said that this was so consequential, not just because it's a whole new strategic direction and a strategic concept for NATO, that they have now labeled Russia the most significant threat, the most dangerous threat to Europe, but he said this was really about all of our values and the kind of world we want to live in.
At the end of the day, what we are doing in Europe is to defend our values, our democracies. You know, the entrance of Finland and Sweden in NATO is not because they want to expand their territories, but to defend their values, their democracies, and of course an international order based on rules, clear rules that provide certainty and security to our societies.
And of course, Finland and Sweden, as he mentioned, having had decades of historic neutrality, are now back on the fast track to NATO after Turkey lifted its veto overnight. Becky?
Yeah, fascinating. Christiane Show, a couple of hours from now. Stay with CNN for that. Christiane, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. We are taking a very short break. Back after this.
What do you see when you look at the surface? Just that, the surface. But dive deeper and new possibilities emerge. Essential intelligence from S&P Global takes you here, providing the data, risk assessment, and workflow solutions you need to plumb the wonders beneath. A better, more prosperous future awaits. It's yours for the seeking. S&P Global. Seek and prosper.
Wherever you go in the world, one airline goes further to make it feel exceptional. Qatar Airways, going places together.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Call to Earth, in partnership with Rolex and their Perpetual Planet Initiative.
Well, this is Call to Earth Week on Connect the World, and our series looking after the planet. Today's report is looking at how to protect nature's highways, bringing us a range of stories on amazing feats of animal migration. As our guest editor, the CEO of BirdLife International, Patricia Zorita, here's how she is protecting the world's flyways. But for those of us who enjoy eating strawberries, this might make you think twice. Have a look.
Birds connect us to life. The mere fact that they can fly and the fact that there's 11,000 species in all types of shapes and sizes, what's not to love about them? I'm Patricia Zorita. I'm the Chief Executive of BirdLife International. We are in a magical place. It's called Doñana National Park. We are in the southern part of Spain. It's one of the most important wetlands in the whole of Europe, and it's truly a safe haven for birds. You have, they say, 2 billion birds using the Africa-Eurasia flyway. That is the flyway that goes from southern Africa all the way up to Europe and Asia. This is the pit stop. Doñana is the place where you fuel up. I mean, these are highways that are being used by these birds every single autumn and every single spring because they need to find safer places to nest and warmer places to winter. When we catch them on the net, we are able to ring them. We can monitor how many birds are coming, what type of species are coming, and then make inferences about populations. This helps us understand how many birds are using Doñana when they are migrating. So this is a garden warbler that came from sub-Saharan Africa. Go to Europe. Yeah, Doñana is in huge jeopardy. First, you have climate change. This last drought has lasted 25 years, and the wetland is not replenishing, but also industrial agriculture that is sucking up too much water from the aquifer, creating an absolute crisis in this incredibly important space for nature. I mean, this type of extensive and intensive agriculture is completely counter to what a natural system is. You have rows and rows and rows of strawberries. Yes, all of them look incredibly delicious, but it's like a moonscape. This is not nature. We are seeing populations of birds not being able to breed anymore. Zero breeding for the last years, for whisker terns, for example. They used to have thousands of babies here 5 years ago. That's not happening anymore. What we need to do is just step back and rethink the system so we can put it back in balance. And this is exactly the type of agriculture that we need to maintain the health of these wetlands like Doñana. So we're maintaining the connectivity of the flyway through maintaining this traditional way of producing vineyards. There's no irrigation lines here. They don't need harmful pesticides, and they are producing this amazing product that is actually economically viable for the local producers, and is the home of these amazing migrant birds that are coming from Africa. These amazing places can recover, but the minute that you give nature a chance, it bounces back. That we just have to give it a chance, then we'll make it happen. I just hope that it's not going to be too late.
Well, Patricia Zurita has selected a series of conservation corridors under threat for CNN, from whale sharks travelling along the Belize Barrier Reef to grizzly bears moving from Yellowstone to the Yukon. We'll be learning about that later in the week. Let us know what you are doing to answer the call with the hashtag #CallToEarth. We'll be right back.
This is a hope spot, an area of the ocean painstakingly preserved by men and women whose lives depend on it. Today, there are more than 130 hope spots around the world. Thanks to Mission Blue, the organization founded by explorer and marine biologist Sylvia Earle, they are multiplying. From the Mediterranean to the Caribbean, from the Antarctic to the Pacific. We support this initiative because we know that our survival depends on the ocean. Safeguarding its fauna and flora ensures the future of our planet and makes it perpetual.
Summer in Abu Dhabi. It's everything you want, but so much more than you'd expect. It's relaxing days at the pool in water as chilled as your drink. It's bonding with family, but upside down. And even more so, it's burning rubber on an F1 racetrack, roller coasters breaking records. It's seizing the day or owning the night. It's literally drinking 23 karat gold. It's uniquely designed to make it the summer of your dreams. Abu Dhabi has everything you need to summer like you mean it.
Well, next hour, a verdict is expected in the trial of 20 suspects in the November 2015 terror attacks in Paris. Here you see the convoy believed to be transporting the main suspect arriving at the court earlier. He faces possible life imprisonment without parole. Apologies, I think we may be having technical issues with the video here. Here we are. Islamist attackers killed 130 people at multiple sites, including the Bataclan Music Hall, the Stade de France Sports Stadium, and several restaurants and cafes. Well, any minute now, US President Joe Biden will meet with his Turkish counterpart in Madrid. Turkey earlier green-lighting Finland and Sweden's NATO membership bids. Ankara plans to ask again those countries to extradite more than 30 members of groups it deems terrorist organizations. Well, the focus on Turkey is also putting new focus on its drone program. CNN's Nina Dos Santos explains.
The Bayraktar TB2, Turkey's most effective drone and one of its president's most assertive foreign policy tools. With NATO members meeting in Spain, Turkey's leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan is lobbying hard to lift embargoes on Ankara's weaponry. Just as he held out against Sweden and Finland joining the bloc until obtaining security guarantees at the 11th hour. Finland had previously hinted that it would potentially buy Turkish drones if admitted to the alliance, while the UK may be the next to acquire them, according to Turkey's industry minister. It's moves like these that have revamped the image of Turkish drones, once subject to embargoes due to their use in contentious conflicts, including in Africa.
The image of drones in general has changed over time. There really have been these waves of moments where drones were seen as really negative and evil. And now indeed in Ukraine, they're seen as a really important system to be used by Ukraine against the Russian invasion.
Turkey's drones have become such a cult military item that they've inspired this pop song filmed on the battlefield in Ukraine. The Turkish economy may be stuck in the doldrums, but sales of drones have soared since the war in Ukraine started, meaning a boom for the drone's maker Baykar, co-owned by Erdogan's son-in-law, which last year posted record profits. But will Turkey's drone diplomacy, as it's been called, work?
One of the reasons why Turkey started its drone program was indeed that it couldn't buy armed drones and other drones from especially the United States, because the United States didn't want to export them. And then on the back of it, it realized, well, I can also export these systems to countries that may also not get American or Israeli or indeed now Chinese systems.
With the second largest army in NATO, Turkey is an unlikely country to be focusing so heavily on unmanned combat. But with drones like these for sale, one of Turkey's priorities at NATO is putting more of them on the market. Ina Dos Santos, CNN.
And we are awaiting the appearance of Joe Biden, the US president, with the Turkish president, who will be meeting on the sidelines of that very consequential NATO meeting in Madrid. As I just mentioned, next hour, a verdict is expected in the trial of 20 suspects in the November 2015 terror attack in Paris. Our Melissa Bell is in Paris and she joins me now live. What does this trial mean for this country going forward in terms of security and in terms of healing?
Well, you need only look at the size, the scale, the length of this trial, the number of people involved, not just those who are actually on trial, the 14 who appeared in court over the course of the last 10 months, Becky, the 6 tried in absentia, to get an idea of the logistics that went into it. And of course, there has been so much emotion around it. If you cast your mind back to that night of November 13th, 2015, the shock that it represented, not just for Paris, but for anyone who would have been watching the news that night. Just after 9 p.m., a commando of 10 Islamist militants had come into Paris, attacking, as you mentioned, the Stade de France, but also a series of cafes, restaurants, bars. It was the nature of the targets. This was Paris on a Friday night. People out and about, young people in bars and cafes celebrating life, the Western lifestyle that was under attack. It really shook France to its core. And this trial has been at the heart of so much attention here in France by the French press. We spoke to some of the victims before the trial. They said, look, we can't wait for it to start, but also we can't wait for it to end. And that is exactly what's going to happen in just an hour's time, Becky.
7 long years for so many of those who lost loved ones. Thank you. Well, security being ramped up in Hong Kong ahead of a visit from Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday to mark 25 years since the city's handover to China. But years after Beijing promised Hong Kong would retain its freedoms, many China critics now wonder just how much autonomy is really left. CNN's Christy Liu Stout with this report.
The Sino-British relations.
After Margaret Thatcher reached a deal with the Chinese on the return of Hong Kong, a local reporter took the Iron Lady to task.
You signed an agreement with China promising to deliver over 5 million people into the hands of a communist dictatorship.
Thatcher claimed mostly everyone in Hong Kong was happy with the deal and told Emily Lau,
"You may be a solitary exception."
So what do you make of that answer today in 2022?
Many of the journalists who subsequently stood up, they asked similar questions. So even in that room, I wasn't a solitary exception.
July 1, 2022 marks exactly halfway through 50 years of the one country, two systems autonomy Beijing promised to Hong Kong at the 1997 handover. It aims to preserve the city's freedoms of expression and assembly, as well as its institutions, including an independent judiciary.
But in the wake of the 2019 protests, pressure on the city's freedoms intensified thanks to a new national security law. Supporters say the law ended the chaos of 2019 and restored order, but it did more than that. Scenes of mass protests like this are no more. At least 186 people have been arrested under the law, including a 90-year-old Catholic cardinal. The opposition is virtually wiped out, with many of the city's pro-democracy figures in jail or exile. politically charged artworks like the Pillar of Shame Tiananmen Memorial have been removed. Dozens of civil society groups, including the city's largest independent trade union, have disbanded. And national security investigations have led to the shuttering of news outlets like the Apple Daily. When asked about charges of diminished freedoms, a Hong Kong government spokesman told CNN many freedoms and rights are not absolute and can be restricted for reasons including protection of national security and public safety. So, as